Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. My name is Maya, and from the moment I could understand the words responsible and disappointment, I knew which one belonged to me. I was the older daughter, the standard bearer, and if anything went wrong in our tidy suburban house outside Charlotte, the finger landed on me first. When I was 9, my little sister, Ebony, knocked our mother's favorite porcelain vase to the floor while racing through the living room. My mother looked at the shards, looked at Ebony, then turned to me. "You're the older sister. You should have stopped this." I sat in my room afterward and learned the lesson I would keep swallowing for years. I would be held accountable for everyone. That dynamic defined our home. If Ebony and I both left dishes in the sink, I received a lecture about respect and setting an example. She received a soft sigh and a gentle reminder. When we both snuck out as teenagers and returned late, Ebony got a conversation, and I got a month-long punishment and a midnight sermon cataloging every poor choice I might ever make. So I did what children like me often do. I made myself a shield of perfection. I buried myself in advanced placement classes and debate, clocked hours at a bookstore to close my scholarship gap, and drew a 5-year plan that would carry me out of that house and into the life I wanted. The first person who ever saw me as myself was my father's aunt, my great-aunt Loretta. She lived 20 minutes from my college in a neat one-story bungalow that smelled like lavender and old paper. My parents told me to check on her. I started visiting on Sundays, picking up groceries, tending to a leaky faucet, mowing the small lawn. It became the anchor of my week. Aunt Loretta would brew strong tea, sit across from me in the bright, sunlit kitchen, and ask what I thought about my courses, about the world, about what I wanted. "You do not need to be compared to anyone," she said once, patting my hand. "You are enough as you are." Her belief soaked into me like medicine. While I built a future one quiet decision at a time, Ebony drifted. She left high school weeks before graduation, later taking the high school equivalency test, then wandered through short-lived jobs and boyfriends. My mother, Gloria, always had an excuse ready. "She's sensitive," she would say. "She is more free-spirited than you." When Ebony ran off at 18 with a man who rode a motorcycle and spoke in grins, my parents begged the police to file a report and hired a private investigator. I missed midterms to sit with them and manage calls. 3 months later, Ebony walked back in uninjured and unapologetic. "He was cheating," she said, rummaging in the refrigerator. "What's for dinner?" Relief cleared the ledger on her behalf. During my senior year of college, my father, Leon, called to tell me Aunt Loretta had passed away in her sleep. The funeral blurred into handshakes and murmured condolences. A week later, Attorney Charles Whitaker sat me in a high-rise office and read her will. She had made a few small bequests to charities and left the rest, her paid-off house and carefully tended accounts, to me. When I told my mother, she sounded more suspicious than sad. "She left it all to you?" The accusation sat between us like a cold wind. I had sat at Aunt Loretta's table for years. Ebony had not. Ebony erupted when she learned about the inheritance. "So you get everything?" she snapped. "You get the degree, and now you get the money?" The dam I had kept intact all my life cracked. "You could have visited her," I said, voice shaking. "You could have taken the same chances in school. You chose not to. My father told me not to be harsh." Ebony's smirk said the old script was back. I was the villain, she was the wounded innocent. I drove back to campus with Aunt Loretta's note tucked in my wallet. "Trust yourself," and made a choice. I used the inheritance, about $150,000, not to buy a house near my parents or to cushion a quiet life, but to build what I had dreamed about at Aunt Loretta's table, a consulting firm for small businesses. I moved to Raleigh, rented a tiny apartment, and poured every dollar and ounce of energy into the work. The first year nearly broke me. 18-hour days, rejection layered on rejection, dinners out of cartons balanced on a second-hand laptop. But a neighborhood bakery signed on, then a hardware store, then a boutique gym. I broke even by year 1, hired my first employee, Sarah, by year 2, and signed a lease on a small office by year 3. That was when I met Caleb. He worked for one of our newer clients, a mid-sized technology company, as Director of Information Technology Infrastructure. He was steady and thoughtful, with a careful smile and quiet humor. "Want to grab coffee?" he asked after a long meeting. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into weekends on trails. He saw my company and my stubbornness and the ways both were armor. 2 years later, on a windy overlook in Maui, he asked me to marry him, and I said yes. The wedding by a lake in early autumn felt like finally standing in light. A month after we returned, Caleb told me his role was being dissolved in a corporate restructuring and asked if I would consider hiring him. "You have been saying for a year you need operations leadership," he said. "This is my lane." We set boundaries and titles. He became director of operations. I remained chief executive officer. No business talk past 8 in the evening. No work arguments at home. It worked. It worked beautifully. He streamlined processes, handled vendors, took a load from my shoulders, and I stepped into expansion with both hands free. Then my mother called late one night. Ebony had come home from another disaster, my mother said, and needed work. Family helps family. I resisted. I had payroll and responsibilities, a team depending on me. My mother pleaded. Caleb surprised me by suggesting a chance. "Give her a probationary role," he said. "If it fails, it fails." Against my instincts, I interviewed Ebony. She arrived transformed. Hair neat, makeup subtle, blazer pressed, holding a folder with a certificate from a year-long business administration program at a local community college. "I just need a start," she said. The performance was flawless. I set a 3-month probation. Entry-level administrative assistant, reporting to Caleb. To my astonishment, she excelled. Early arrivals, late stays, elegant phone manners, files in order, problems solved before they reached my desk. Caleb praised her. Clients complimented her. I told myself that maybe we all deserved to be surprised. Growth demanded travel. As I scouted expansion in Chicago and Nashville, I came home to find Ebony woven into the daily rhythm of the company. The probation ended. I made her full-time. She organized a welcome baby gift for Sarah, handled a stubborn vendor, smoothed a chaotic intake for a new client. At a team celebration, I caught a fleeting image of Caleb and Ebony laughing at the bar, faces a shade too close. I joined them. Ebony's smile dipped for a breath and then returned. The unease lodged under my breastbone like a splinter. The man who finally faced me with the truth was our head of security, Otis. A retired police officer with a dry wit. He had been with me since the days when I rented a room with flickering lights. Lately he had looked at me with an expression I could not bear. Pity. One Thursday night, I called him into my office. He shifted his weight, stared at the carpet, and pulled up a clip on his tablet from the hallway camera by the storage rooms. Grainy footage bloomed to life. Caleb and Ebony walking, hands brushing, then a kiss that was anything but fleeting before they disappeared together into a dark doorway. There were more clips. Different days. Different corners of my office. The pattern was unmistakable. I drove home without feeling my hands. Caleb was humming over a pot of tomato sauce, domestic and untroubled. I held my phone up and hit play. His face drained. The wooden spoon clattered to the tile. He said it meant nothing. I told him to pack a bag and leave. That night I drafted termination papers citing gross misconduct and violations of policy for both Caleb and Ebony. Signing my husband's name off my payroll felt like setting fire to my own past to keep my present alive. My mother called in a panic and insisted I come to the house. I walked into a tribunal, Gloria and Leon on the sofa, Ebony tear-stained but composed, and Caleb staring at the floor. I connected my phone to the television and played the hallway video on the large screen. For a breath, there was silence. Then the script snapped into place. "These things happen," my mother said. "People fall in love unexpectedly." Ebony dabbed at her eyes and whispered, "We did not want this, Maya. We are in love." Caleb took her hand. "I am pregnant," Ebony added softly. It felt like something inside me tore free. When I told them this did not excuse what they had done, the tone hardened. Caleb threatened to sue, to claim a legal termination. My father accused me of overreacting. Ebony spoke about stress and medical risk and brandished documentation. They demanded I reinstate both, with a raise. "Or we file tomorrow," Caleb said. I looked around the room at the people who should have been my foundation and saw a wall. I walked out. In the morning I called a lawyer with a reputation that made executives sit up straight, Attorney Maurice Bennett. I told him everything and left the grief outside his glass door. He listened, tapped his pen, and asked if I was certain the betrayal stopped at the heart. "People who cross boundaries there often cross them elsewhere," he said. "Has anyone audited your books since your husband took over operations?" The air shifted. I hired an independent forensic team that afternoon. They set up in my conference room and peeled back my company's skin. A week later, Maurice walked me through a bound report that made my stomach drop. There were invoices from fictitious vendors, monthly consulting fees to sham companies, transfers leading to an account in Ebony's name. Caleb had siphoned funds in slow, careful streams. Ebony's expense reports masked luxury clothing, spa appointments, and a week-long business development trip to San Diego with Caleb. Then came wires labeled consulting, routed to my parents' joint account that began 2 months after Ebony was hired. It was not only infidelity. It was conspiracy. They filed first as promised: wrongful termination, discrimination against a pregnant woman, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Caleb demanded alimony and half of the company he insisted he had helped build. Ebony wielded her pregnancy as both shield and sword. My parents submitted affidavits swearing I was unstable and jealous. The first day in court, they arrived as a unit. Gloria and Leon flanking their younger daughter, Caleb walking close, the picture of protective new love. I sat alone with Maurice at my side and felt the earth tilt. Ebony's attorney asked whether I had fired my sister out of envy and spite. No, I said clearly. For violating company policy and for financial misconduct, extensively documented. Ebony began to cry, clutching her abdomen. The jury shifted. The judge called for order. Maurice waited, then began to take the house they had built from lies apart, beam by beam. He presented bank statements tracing money from my accounts to sham vendors to Ebony's deposit. He played authenticated security footage. He produced expense reports with designer handbags and line items for nightlife in San Diego. He entered into evidence emails between Caleb and my father discussing consulting fees, including one in which Leon joked about his promotion. He called the registrar of the community college to testify that Ebony had never enrolled in or completed the program printed on the certificate she had shown me. It was forged. Then came the pattern. Morris's investigators presented records from another state. 3 men had filed police reports accusing Ebony of credit card fraud and later withdrawn them. Bank transfers showed payments from my parents to those men in the weeks following each report. This is not an isolated mistake, Maurice told the judge. It is a coordinated series of deceptions supported and enabled by her parents. I watched denial drain from Caleb's face and anger crease in Ebony's. My parents looked small for the first time in my life. The trial stretched for months. My legal bills swelled. The headlines were cruel and relentless. Employees worried. Clients hesitated. I held all company meetings and told the truth. Some people believed me at once. Some needed time and proof. I showed up every morning and kept the lights on. The judge's ruling landed like thunder. Based on the overwhelming evidence, the court found in my favor. All funds siphoned from my company were to be repaid with interest. Caleb was found guilty of embezzlement and felony fraud and sentenced to 3 years in state prison. Our divorce was finalized without alimony. Because of her pregnancy, Ebony received a suspended sentence with 5 years probation and an order of restitution. My parents avoided criminal charges for lack of direct proof of intent, but faced frozen accounts and court-ordered repayment. The gavel fell, and instead of triumph, I felt a vast quiet open inside me. I sold the house at a loss and moved into a smaller condo near my office, a place with blank walls and new light. I stood in front of my team and told them precisely what had happened. I apologized for the instability and promised transparency. I went home to a quiet kitchen and poured the first cup of coffee in a morning that belonged only to me. Letters came from my parents, self-pitying pleas dressed as forgiveness. I returned them unopened and blocked their calls. Through friends of friends, I heard that Ebony had given birth to a boy, that she and Caleb married in a prison visiting room, that she moved back in with Gloria and Leon, and that the 4 of them were struggling in the small house where I learned to be responsible for everyone. Some nights a guilty flicker tried to spark, the image of an infant caught in the ruin his parents made. But then I remembered the night in my parents' living room, the threats, the demands, the certainty I would fold. I remembered the money that left my accounts by way of hands that should have protected me. Guilt receded. Determination took its place. I rebuilt. We landed the Chicago contract we had chased for months and opened a small satellite office. I expanded our training programs and hired from the community college whose registrar had saved me in court. I joined a trauma support group that met on Wednesday evenings in a church basement and learned how to speak without explaining. I sat with people whose lives had been fractured differently and recognized the same quiet work of stitching themselves back together. Dating did not feel possible for a long time. When friends suggested introductions, I smiled and said I was busy and meant it. I was learning to trust my own eye again, to listen to the knot in my stomach and respect it, to stop arguing myself out of the truth my body knew. One night, unpacking the last box in my new place, I found a photograph from a county fair years ago. Aunt Loretta laughing, our arms linked, her face turned toward mine. I could hear her voice as if she were across the table. Trust yourself. I keep that photograph on my desk next to a notebook where I write what I once ignored. When I feel the old urge to outrun hurt by performing competence, I look at it and set the pen down. The company does not need my perfection. It needs my presence. The people who work for me do not need my protection from every breeze. They need clear policies, fair pay, and a leader who tells the truth. My mother used to say the heart wants what it wants, as if desire erased harm. I do not believe that. The heart wants safety for the people it loves, quiet mornings, a home that belongs to the people who live in it, work that matters more days than it does not, and a bed made each afternoon before dusk settles. Each of those wants is something I can give myself and the people who choose me. Some traces remain. When I pass the storage room at the office late in the evening, I feel a prickle at the base of my neck and keep walking. When an invoice looks the slightest bit strange, I ask Otis to check it, and he does. When a new hire smiles too wide and moves too quickly toward personal confidences, I slow the room by a half step. Boundaries are not walls against joy. They are scaffolding for it. A year after the ruling, a large client invited me to speak to a group of small business owners about building sustainable systems. I stood in a conference center in Chicago with the skyline blistered against the windows and told a room of strangers that success is not just about growth. It is about who you invite to stand beside you while you grow. I told them that operations is intimacy, that fraud is often dressed like loyalty, and that the sign you are on the right path is not applause but sleep. Afterward, a woman waited until the crowd thinned and said quietly that her sister had asked her for a job. I keep hearing my mother's voice, she said. Family helps family. I told her the sentence I carved out of everything that happened to me. Family helps family by telling the truth. The woman nodded, and I thought of Aunt Loretta's kitchen again, sunlight on the table, the certainty that I was allowed to want something other than duty. In spring, I drove out to the small cemetery where Aunt Loretta is buried with a paper cup of coffee and sat on the warm stone border to tell her what I had done with what she gave me. I talked about the second office and the bakery that still sends me a cake on my birthday, about hiring interns, about the team's baby shower for Sarah, about the Wednesday evening circle, about the photograph of us that lives on my desk. The dogwood above her stone flickered white in the breeze. I left the empty cup in the trash near the gate and drove back into the day. I do not know what my parents tell themselves now. Perhaps that they were tricked. Perhaps that they sacrificed for love. Perhaps that they did what any mother and father would do. I know only that they asked me to fund a lie and I stepped away. There is a cost to refusing an inheritance of silence. There is also a freedom. On the anniversary of my first signed client, I ordered takeout from the bakery. The owner makes a savory pie that tastes like patience, and stayed late at the office with the core team. We ate at the long table in the conference room, laughed about the year's missteps, and named the small wins out loud. Before we turned out the lights, I stacked the plates and straightened the chairs and stood for a moment in the doorway looking into the darkened room where I had once watched strangers map my finances. The room was mine again. I understand now that the first betrayal was not the kiss in the hallway. It was the lesson I learned as a child when I was punished for what I could not control. I became a person who solved problems out of sight, so no one would have to look at the mess. I built a company with that same energy. It was efficient and admired and dangerously vulnerable to people who knew exactly where I would refuse to see. I will never again turn away from what is right in front of me. And if I wake at 3 in the morning with the old alarm clanging in my chest, I walk into the living room and look out over the quiet street and name the proofs of life I did not have and do now. The steady hum of the refrigerator, the stack of invoices that balance, the text from an employee that says their child's fever broke, the email from a client who wants to renew early, the photograph of a woman who taught me that wanting a future is not arrogance but courage. When I make my bed each morning, I smooth the sheets tight and flip the pillowcases so the open ends face outward, a habit that feels like a small vow. I own what happens in this house. I own what happens in the company I built. The boundary is not mean, it is merciful. It keeps me available for the life I am living now. Ebony has not reached out. Through a cousin I do not speak to often, I hear she is back at my parents' house, and that they take turns holding the baby while arguing about bills. I do not pray for misfortune. I do not need revenge. The consequences they tried to hand me returned home of their own accord. What I do wish, if a wish has any weight at all, is that the child grows into a person who believes the truth when he hears it, even if he has to find it somewhere else. My company's walls hold framed photographs now. Day 1 in the first office with mismatched chairs, the ribbon cutting at the Chicago satellite, the team around Sarah at her baby shower, and one photo of Aunt Loretta's house taken on a bright Sunday afternoon when the kitchen window threw a patch of light across the table. Visitors think it is a pretty picture. I know it is a map. The last time I spoke in front of a room of business owners, someone asked how I kept moving when it felt like everything was falling apart. I did not keep moving, I said. I stopped, I named what happened, and I built again from what remained. I saw heads nod. I saw a few people write the sentence down. I thought of all the rooms in which I had once explained myself to people who would never hear me and felt grateful for a room that did. I walked to work some mornings, coffee in hand, the city waking around me. The bakery owner waves against her window, and a delivery truck idles at the curb. The door to our office sticks in humidity. I hip it open the way Otis showed me. He grunts a hello from the security desk. Morning, I say, and I mean it. At my desk I sit for a minute before the email flood begins and touch the top edge of the photograph of Aunt Loretta and me. I wish I could tell her how much of my life started in her kitchen, how the shape of it is still there. Hot tea, honest questions, a table between two people where truth sits like a third person and refuses to be moved. I do not know who I will love next, or if I will. I am not rushing toward it. If he comes, he will meet me here, in the life I built without apology, at the pace I learned from losing and rebuilding. He will find me already whole and will be asked to be himself, not my proof. That is the only kind of partnership I will ever accept. The future does not feel like a cliff now. It feels like a set of steps, plain, sturdy, yes, but heading where I chose to go. I climb them in flats and sometimes in sneakers and then in heels if the meeting calls for it. I open doors. I close a few. I keep the keys in my own pocket. Once in a while a new client asks how I began. I tell them my version without spectacle. I had an aunt who believed in me. I used a gift to build a company. I hired the wrong people and learned why that happened. And then I hired better ones. I do not tell them everything. They do not need the whole map. They only need to know that commerce and character are not separate projects. There is a great hum in a company that has survived. Printers' phones, a laugh from the break room, a door closing, a cart rolling down the hall. It sounds like breathing. I stand in the doorway, sometimes with a cup of tea, and listen to it. I do not interrupt. I do not apologize for wanting to protect it with everything I have. When I lock up at night, Otis walks me to the elevator. All quiet, he says. Good, I answer. The doors close. In the mirrored panel I see a woman I recognize, tired some days, hopeful most, clear-eyed either way. I nod to her, as if we are meeting for the first time, and step into the evening air. I built a life out of what was left and what was given. I keep the promises I make to myself. I leave the door open for grace and close it to harm. I am not the responsible one because someone else refuses to be. I am responsible to the person Aunt Loretta told the truth to in a sunlit kitchen, and to the people who come to work each morning trusting me to keep my word. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.